I wanted to share with you one little story, probably the late 80s, early 90s. I was asked to do a presentation in North Carolina, and it was about personal protective equipment and logging industry. It was a workshop that was being held at a community college, and it all really got me started on two questions that I often ask, and that is, what is an accident? And then what is safety? And I wanted to share with you a little story. I've really never put it in a video, but it has to do with what safety is. And it was shared with me from a guy named Doug Duncan, who was safety and training with the North Carolina Forestry Association back years ago. And he shared it with me after I finished up a talk on the personal protective at that workshop. But he went on to tell me the story, and it really highlights what safety is all about. He said a couple, they had met in the Army, and they were in on 6-year term, and more or less they enjoyed the outdoors. So constantly, every spare minute they had, they were going camping or hiking or biking or fishing or whatever. And they were getting close to the end of their 6-year term, and they had kind of fallen in love. They decided to get married, and their idea was that they were going to buy a piece of property there on a lake in North Carolina and build a little cabin on it, and then basically hunt and fish the rest of their days, or at least till they ran out of money. And sure enough, they got their cabin finished. They had checked in. It had been in about four months or so, and they had met a group down at a local restaurant. And they'd go in every morning and eat biscuits and drink coffee, and they had a whole group there that would sit around and talk about the big fish and the big bucks, and then they'd go out hunting or fishing, come back and have a whole new set of stories the next morning. They said it was a real fun group to be around. Well, one morning they were sitting there talking, and a terrible storm blew in. Wind, rain, lightning. Wasn't a real pretty day. And they had one of the guys stood up and said, I think I'm going to go on to work today and get a few things caught up, so I'll have more time to hit the lake just as soon as this weather breaks. Said another one stood up and said, yeah, me too. I've got some things to get done around the house, so I think I'm going to get that done. And then I'm going to hit the water because the fish ought to be tearing it up. He said pretty soon they were sitting there by themselves. Didn't really think about it, but he said, maybe I ought to find me a good part-time job, something to do on these bad weather days, have a little extra gas money for the boat. And he said, I'm going to check around and see what I can find. So he started looking around the next couple of days and hadn't really found anything. He got to the restaurant by himself the next morning. He was sitting there reading the newspaper, and in a little classified ad, it said, game warden wanted part-time. He said, that could be pretty good for me. He said, in the military, he said, actually, I was law enforcement. I was an MP my whole term. And then hunting and fishing is definitely right up my alley. And all he wants something part-time. He said, this could work out pretty good. I think I'll go down and talk to him. So that was on Wednesday evening. Thursday morning, got all his paperwork together, went down and found the gentleman's desk. And he laid all his paperwork out, his resume. And the game warden looked over it just a second. He said, man, you can start today. He said, you're exactly what I'm looking for. He said, with your background with the military and the law enforcement, then the hunting and fishing, he said, this could work out so good, and all I've got budget for is part-time, so this could really work great for both of us. He said, you can start today. Well, he told him, and said, I hadn't really planned on starting today. He said, I got a little fishing trip planned this weekend, but he said, if you let me start Monday, he said, I'll take the job. So sure enough, they worked it out, and game warden a little happy. He's got him some help coming in Monday, and he got his part-time job that he wanted, and so they were both happy. Well, Friday he got everything packed up. He was going to head out of town on his trip, and he said, I think I'm going to drop by the restaurant this morning and tell my buddies about the new job I've got. They'll be excited for me. So he had everything packed up. So he drove on down to the restaurant, and he said, got out, and just about the time he started to open the front door handle, though, he said it hit him like a stick right beside the head. He said, I didn't think about this. He said, I wonder what my buddy's going to think sitting down to breakfast every morning with the game warden. He said, I might have really screwed up. They may not want to talk about the big fish and the big bucks with me sitting there at the table. So he laughed about it a little bit, but he came up with a good plan. He went in, sat down, and waited for just the right moment, listened to a few stories, and then he said, folks, got something to share with you today. They said, what is it? He said, well, I've got me a good part-time job. They said, that's awesome. What you going to be doing? He said, well, actually, I'm the new game warden. And as he thought, he said, everybody just kind of stared at him. And I said, I know it's none of you here at the table that's breaking the rules, but there are people out there hunting and fishing without a license. He said, it's my job to catch them now. And he said, if you'll just help me. And his plan was, he pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. He said, let's make a list of those I need to go after first. And about the same time, they hollered out, Old Man Sam. And they said, he's always got fresh meat on the table, never had a license in his life. He said, that's the one you got to catch first. But naturally, they had a long list, so he had a lot of work to do ahead of him. Well, to make a long story short, he had his list of folks now, and he got to thinking about where everybody was located, and he started looking around the lake, and he found Old Man Sam's cabin was right across the lake from his. He said, I think I'm going to start off with the big one first tomorrow. He said, I'm going to go after Old Sam, see if I can catch him first off. So he got up early the next morning, about 4:30, drove over. He parked his truck where nobody could watch him. He said, he's standing there and watching. About 4:45, the lights come on. He said, Old Sam is going to be going out today. He said, I'm going to get him today. He said, about 5 o'clock, old gentleman come out on the porch, had a cup of coffee in his hand, stretched a little bit, said just as loud as he could. He said, Mr. Game Warden. He said, no, you're out there watching me today. He said, I'm not going anywhere today. He said, come on down. I hadn't met you yet. Let's talk. Game Warden said, I can't believe it. He said, I didn't tell a soul. He said, must be one of those guys at the restaurant, though, that's playing a trick on me. They know who's on the list. They're calling these people just as soon as they see me leaving the house. He said, somebody's a snitch. Well, he was a little embarrassed, but he went on down, met old Sam there on the porch. They started talking about the big fish and the big bucks, but he said, more he got talking with him. He said, he knew I was there. He said, somebody had to call him and alert him. Well, they talked for a long time, a little bit embarrassed. He left, and next couple of days, he's kind of listening around, trying to figure out who this snitch might be so he could get back on his business for that big list. He said, didn't really come up with anybody. He said, well, a couple of days later, maybe it was just a fluke thing. He said, maybe Old Man Sam just guessed. He said, I'm going to try him again in the morning, see if I can surprise him. So he got up early next morning, goes over, parks his truck in a different spot. About 5 o'clock, he's watching Old Sam's cabin. He said, Old Sam, come back out on the front porch again, looks almost straight up the hill at him, said just as loud as he could. He said, Mr. Game Warden. He said, no, you out there watching me again today? But he said, I'm not going anywhere today either. He said, come on down. I enjoyed your visit the other day. Let's do it again. So embarrassed, he just turned around and left. Didn't even go down. He said, I got to figure out who this snitch is so I can catch him and the rest of this list. Well, about 3 or 4 days later, he was sitting there in the restaurant, and he was gotten there before everybody had, and he was kind of going over what he's going to do for the day. The guy would kind of always sit over in the corner. He came up there to him, and this guy's not really part of their table. He's always over in the corner eating breakfast, but not really part of their group. So he said, this guy might be the snitch. He said, he's always over there. He might have overheard my list. Anyway, the gentleman came over to him. He said, Mr. Game Warden, he said, you know Old Sam, don't you? His ears kind of perked up. He said, yeah, I met him one time. Why do you ask? He said, well, I didn't know if you knew it or not, but I'm kind of friends with Old Sam's family. And they called me yesterday, said they had to put Old Sam in the hospital. He said, he thinks the world of you. He's been talking about you a lot the past couple of weeks. You ought to go down and visit with him. It'd make his day. He said, well, I'll get down there this afternoon and visit with him. So he got down to the hospital that afternoon and found Old Sam's room. He knocked on the door, went inside. Old Sam's eyes lit up. They started talking about the big fish and the big bucks. But the more he got talking with him, he said, this guy doesn't look too good. He said, if he checks out of here the wrong way, he said, I'm never going to figure out who this snitch is. So he said, I think I'm going to ask him, see if he'll help me out. Maybe he'll help me figure out who this snitch is. So he said, Mr. Sam, he said, you remember that first day we met? He said, yeah, son, I appreciate you coming by the house and all. He said, well, I got to kind of ask you a personal question. He said, well, anything, I'll try to answer it. He said, I got to know who called you and told you I was coming to see you that day. He said, what do you mean? He said, well, somebody had to call you. You know I was out there and stuff. I just got to know who it is. He said, well, son, I don't know of anybody calling me. He said, well, I came back again a few days later and you knew I was out there. He said, somebody had to call you and alert you I was out and about. I just got to know. Who is it? He said, well, son, I don't know of anybody calling. He said, well, you came out on the porch, hollered for me both times. He said, somebody had to call you and alert you I was out and about. He said, well, son, I don't know of anybody calling. But he said, as far as falling off the porch, he said, I start my day that way every morning. And you know, I kind of chuckled a little bit. I don't know that I caught on to it completely. But then Doug said something to me that kind of stuck with me, and I've really thought about this for many years. He said, you know, one thing old man Sam recognized forefront every morning was opposition was out there somewhere. He said, think about it. How can you ever put it in your planning process to keep unplanned events, an accident, from happening if you're not aware of those things that cause them? And that kind of stuck with me. That's really what safety is all about, isn't it? It's an awareness. It's an understanding. And you know, I guess, you know, Soren Erickson always used to say that the best thing that you can do is have experience. You know, you need experience. But he said, you know, you really have to think about there's two different kinds of experience. There's good ones and there's bad ones. He said, you want to learn the good ones on your own. You want to learn the bad ones from somebody else. And you know, that's something where, you know, an accident is an unplanned event, but safety is being aware of what can cause those accidents. I hope you picked up something from that story to think about, and it's really what safety is all about as we travel along this Forest Apps Road. Y'all have a great one.